Let's pray. God, I give you thanks for those in this room who have a heart, a calling, a passion for ministry with young people, for families and for your church. We ask that you would dwell richly in this place, that you would reveal more of your mystery to us. Amen. That also counts as grace. So I want you to imagine that you and your spouse or you and your family are travelling to your friend's house for dinner. You've been invited there and you've done this several times. It's a routine, if you like. And on the way, you hit traffic. You're going to be late. Now, if I'm driving, I'm frustrated. I don't like being late. But your spouse says, look, don't worry. I'll just send them a text. You know, we're going to be late. That's fine. So you do. You turn up a couple of minutes late. The roast is still in the oven. All good. No problem at all. I want you to imagine the same scenario, but you heard that day of a shortcut. There's a different route you can take on this familiar journey. We're going to take the shortcut tonight. And on the way, on that shortcut, you hit traffic. You're going to be late. Instead of the calm text to warn that you're going to be late. I don't know if you're like me, but World War III erupts in the front of that car. Had we just gone the normal way, we would have been there. But no, you wanted to go this new way. The few chuckles mean that I'm not alone. And this actually has nothing to do with what I'm going to say this morning. It's just a therapy for me to get out there and you know, just get it off my chest. But I think that it does say something about how we view innovation and risk. I think it does say something about how we judge decisions based purely on results. And I'm not sure that that's that helpful. Before we jump in, if you have a phone that is connected to the internet, I want you to Google something, and this is mainly because I didn't do it. So I'm asking you to do it. This is the audience participation part of this morning. If you don't have a phone or device, just someone at your table will and they will share. Google the Choluteca Bridge. It's Saturday morning. CHOLUTECA. I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but it's in Honduras. The Choluteca Bridge, CHOLUTECA, and go to images, and you will see probably the second or third image should be somewhat startling to you. Maybe the fourth. It depends. I don't know how Google works, but the story of the Choluteca Bridge is it was quite a famous landmark in its town. But then a tropical storm came through Choluteca and moved the river over which the bridge ran. The river was redirected. The Choluteca Bridge still stands today as a bridge. It just serves no purpose. No one uses it. No one goes on it. They built a new bridge further down the river. Somewhere between the front seat of my car driving to our friends for dinner and the Choluteca Bridge, you might get an idea of or an image or a metaphor of how we feel, how we approach ministry with young people today. My name's Bradon. I also want to acknowledge the lands on which we stand and that sovereignty was never ceded. I'm a husband to Mel and I've got two kids and they both had a sleepover last night, which was their first. They are 8.5 and 6. So I was in a very nice hotel at Scabs, and my wife had a night without anyone in the house, and apparently it was delightful. So They're both at school. I've been in ministry for about 15 years, and before that I trained as a special ed primary teacher. All my ministry's been in different settings within the Uniting Church of Australia, and I can tell you this, anything you've heard about the Uniting Church is probably entirely true and not true at all. We are a diverse tribe of people, and that'll kill us in the end, but it has been my privilege to serve them for that time. I'm currently based in Melbourne, working for Victoria and Tasmania Synod, and my role is the Intergenerational Youth Ministry Consultant, whatever. There's actually no verb at the end of my title, it just says Intergenerational Youth. So, okay, sure. A large part of my work is with migrant communities, particularly from Asia and the Pacific. I'm doing an increasing amount of work around mental health for young people and how we can resource leaders to access health and support from professionals and to break down some of the stigma and taboo around that. I'm also involved in rolling out safe church strategies in response to the Royal Commission and the Victorian Government standards. I love my job. It's a great privilege I have. I started nearly 2 years ago after working in New South Wales. So I was born and raised Western Sydney, and I worked for the New South Wales ACT Synod of the Uniting Church on children, youth, young adults and tertiary ministries for 6 years, and that was good fun. It was one of those great jobs that's just too big so everyone has zero expectations. If you get one of those gigs, they're glorious. I assume it's like if you have multiple parishes, you just tell each of them that you're at the other one that day and, you know, sleep in. Yeah, there's a few uncomfortable squirms. We're on to you. My experience has overwhelmingly been in youth ministry, but for a couple of years at a church when I was very young, like early 20s, they employed me full-time, and within a couple of weeks all the young people had left. They say it's coincidental, but it's a humbling experience, and so we looked around and we realised there was a lot of young families. They said, Bradon, what should we do? I said, well, playgroups. Let's run playgroups. So at one point I was running 6 playgroups a week as a young man with no kids. It was strange. I can help. We could do a whole workshop on paper plate crafts. We're not going to, but at one point I was the master of it. And I can tell you that when my wife became pregnant, the week that I announced to my playgroup friends that I was about to become a dad, you could hear every person in the room exhale and go, oh, we can trust you now. Because I went from this random young adult man who was just running playgroup crafts to suddenly a prospective parent, and then I got to hear birth stories. That was terrifying. Please don't share them. Please don't. Like, I'm glad you had the experience. Like prospective dads don't need to hear them. They just don't. They're going to go through enough trauma. All right, we're going to clarify some terms before we jump in, because intergenerational can be inspirational. Yeah, no, we won't do that little story. But we've heard also about multi-generational, we've heard about cross-generational, so I'm going to use Skittles to explain my understanding of what we're on about today. You've got a bowl of Skittles. Multi-generational, multi-Skittles would be eating just one colour out of the bowl of many colours. So the bowl is a multi-Skittle bowl, but you're just going to eat the red ones or the green ones. Cross-generational Skittle eating, you're going to go crazy and have different colours in the same mouthful. You're going to go all out. You're going to have the yellow and the green and maybe the orange, because that's the only way to eat orange ones. Inter-Skittle eating is about mutual, equal and reciprocal appreciation of Skittles. It wasn't a great metaphor, but we're going to get into those words later. But to recognise that this is an evolution. We thought that multi-generational ministry was great, and it is. But then we saw the opportunity to push and to learn from cross-generational relationships. And then we began to explore and ask the bigger questions, and at this point we see that there is benefit in intergenerational ministry. So we're going to start by me telling you what it's not, and that's not a helpful teaching strategy, I recognise that, but I wanted to be very clear that it's not an evolution of children's ministry. I want to get that straight out. Now, children's ministry people are often pioneers and they're on the cutting edge, so they've got a lot of credit for progressing the conversation and power to them. But, and there was the book out in 2012 by Holly Catterton Allen, Intergenerational Faith Formation. If you haven't read it, spend the rest of this talk buying it for your Kindle. It's a dense book, but it is sort of this, one of the founding texts of the last push, I would say. And children's ministry people picked it up, that this is great, but it is not the evolution of children's ministry. It's not that we thought play groups are great, then messy church was great, oh, godly play was great, oh, now it's intergenerational. In fact, a friend of mine showed me this diagram, and I found it really helpful. So we started here at this dot. Now I'm recording this for a podcast, which I'll tell you about in a moment. So this diagram for the podcast audience is useless, but they're fairly used to that. So this is the church, and we wanted to address how we're going to do effective, sustainable ministry with all generations, and we headed off on this trajectory for a while, thinking that this was where God was leading us. And then maybe 10, 15 years ago, we got to this point and we discovered something like messy church, or it could have been godly play, it could have been playgroups, whatever. And we thought, trusting God, we'd head this way. And we thought that this was the direction we wanted to head. And then we got to this point, and trusting God, we thought, actually, maybe it's this way. The destination, we didn't have a fixed destination, we simply were seeking to be faithful. And then we might say that in the last few years we've gone, actually, we want to explore what it means to be intergenerational. And so we're on this trajectory. Now, some people say, why didn't we just do this? And that's a good question, that's a valid question, but that assumes that this is the final destination, and I'm not sure that I'm here to tell you that it is. But I am confident that there is benefit and hope and vitality and energy in exploring what it means to be intergenerational at this time. And so that's sort of the trajectory we're going on. But I'm also very happy that if we get to anywhere along this line and God leads us further on, that we can do a U-turn, we can go, we'll end up back there for sure, absolutely. But that's the journey we're on. And the podcast audience, I'll put that great diagram up on the website. And that's a great segue to tell you about the podcast, actually. I'm the producer, host, writer, editor, and audio technician for the #1 youth ministry podcast in the Uniting Church. It is the only youth ministry podcast in the Uniting Church, but stats matter. And when you've got this little bumbling, humble podcast, any sort of endorsement you can get is worth it. And so it's called Work Experience Podcast. And the whole premise was, I was gutted that for a really long time, no one had ever asked to do work experience with me. So I thought I would inflict my work experience upon an audience. The irony is that 6 months in, a young woman from Albury said, hey, can I come and do work experience with you? And so the game was up, but we've nevertheless persisted. And the premise is seeking to explore this intersection between young people and the church. And the new tagline is youth ministry, not just youth group ministry, recognising that young people are whole and diverse and complex individuals. Workxpc.com is the link. There it is, and it's available wherever you subscribe to podcasts. And if you don't subscribe to podcasts, you should, and I can show you how to access them on your smartphone over breakfast. Thank you. Thank you. Don't listen to the early episodes, they're awful. But recent ones are pretty good, I reckon. And this talk, if any of the microphones work, is next week's episode. So skip next week's episode, you are ahead of the game. Unless you're listening, in which case this is getting kind of meta. So let's carry on, because this has been an awful lot of waffle, and the quiche is on its way. I also want to say, before we get into what I think it is, that intergenerational ministry cannot be some sort of parasitic attempt for churches to remain vital by leeching off children or, on the other end, affluent older generations. This can't be some last-ditch attempt for us to remain vital by sacrificing things and just dragging people in. Parasites do that. Zombies do that. I believe that we are very much alive and very much called to minister to all people. So, that's what it's not. I think intergenerational ministry, I think that's my bottle over there, is relevant for all people, for all the church. We might consider it a core value, something fundamental to who we are and who we want to be. We might consider it an attitude, which is simply how we approach the other, in that case someone outside our own age demographic. We might consider it part of our ministry ethos and philosophy, the way we do the things we do. I believe it has to encompass all parts of our community life. It is not a worship program. It has to encompass all our life. It can be characterised, I found this in a book, by people across generations doing life together. I'm not sure what that phrase doing life means, but people say it a lot, particularly in Christian circles. So it made its way in. Things like sharing and learning and growing and serving in relationships marked by mutuality, reciprocity, and equality. Now you'll remember that's how we ate the Skittles. So I'm going to break those down. Mutuality, we all benefit. All people benefit. Reciprocity, we all give and receive. And equality, we're all valued equally. Now ironically, in Microsoft Word, if you right-click and look for synonyms, they all come up for each other. So, you know, we're probably splitting hairs to use 3 different words that largely mean similar things, but it's helpful teaching in 3s. Mutuality, reciprocity, and equality. Intergenerational ministry is far more than worship, and it's far more than just children. I want you to turn to your table. This gives a chance for people who are taking notes, which is quite overwhelming, I can tell you. Not many people take notes when I talk. What does this look like? What have you heard so far? What might this look like where you are? Or simply, gosh, I hope they're not serving the quiche. But say hello to your friends, take stock. I'm giving you 2 minutes. Reciprocity, mutuality, equality. What might that look like where you are before we keep going?
Just does it for us.
that, like we have a children's program once a month in church and context, but actually then what about all the other aspects of it and intergenerational education
All right, I'm going to draw you back. I know I've interrupted those conversations, but you can pick them up over breakfast. See what I did there? I want to spend a bit of time unpacking a bit more what this is, and then I'm going to throw a few ideas out there on what this could mean. And then I'm doing a workshop later, and there'll be a lot less of us, and we're going to gather in a circle, and I'm going to explore some of the practicalities. So you'll be like, yeah, that's great, Bradon, that's all theory and stuff. Then in the workshop, we're going to unpack some of what that might mean on the ground, okay? But it's being filmed, so the other ones, I was reading, the other two sound really great too, so you can just get the video, that's fine. It'll be up by the end of today, won't it, Mark? They'll all be online by the end of today, so you can pick it up. I've got to tell you a funny story that's not in the notes. This last week I've been in Sydney. Remember, I live in Melbourne. I went up to Sydney because there was a death in my family. And I'm the sort of family chaplain. You know, Bradon works for the church. He's the most religious. So when something goes wrong, we call him. So I drove up because my great uncle had died. That's the title, not necessarily the qualifier. But he had passed away. And so I drove up on Monday, 9 hours in the car. And I met with his children, with my nana, his sister, and heard stories. A privilege to hear stories about a person's life. And then we found out that he wasn't legally dead. That was hilarious, in the most unhilarious way. So there was no death certificate. So whilst he was very much deceased, legally he wasn't. So the funeral was actually not for another week and a half, fun story. But so it meant I drove back to Melbourne Thursday night to fly here yesterday. Thank you, Mark, for the invitation and putting me up at Scabs, lunch at Trig. Perth's not big on multiple syllables. But the reason I tell you this story is Monday night I ring my kids to say goodnight, and my daughter, who is 8.5, Dad tells me about school. She goes, Dad, remember, you're allowed to be sad because it lets other people know they can be sad. And I didn't teach her that. That was not in any of the books that we read at night time. We're reading Harry Potter, and I'm not sure Harry Potter covers that. But in that moment, all those gushy parenting feelings come to the fore. But it was this reality check of, rather than just being in work mode for this family, of which I'm a part, to actually allow people to be sad. Intergenerational connections can happen between any two generations. Therefore, when an 80-year-old is talking to a 60-year-old about what it means to put down your professional career and enter retirement, when a 20-year-old's telling the teen about what MySpace was, we've got intergenerational communities going on. So much of the discussion about intergenerational ministry is about our doing. I want to frame it more in terms of relationships and attitudes being a fundamental aspect of our being. It's not a program. I'm not going to sell you something at the end of this that'll cover term 1. Beyond the pragmatic and the programmatic, the transition to a generally intergenerational paradigm involves a change in our attitudes, our behaviours, and our openness towards those that are different to ourselves. In this case, chronologically. James White, who's written a bunch of books, talks about that intergenerational ministry is 2 or more different age groups together, learning, growing, living in faith through in-common experiences, parallel learning, contributive occasions, and interactive sharings. Buy his book. We don't have time to unpack all of those. And John Roberto, who is a lovely old guy from America, or Canada maybe. I don't know. He talks about Weebly websites a lot. If you've ever heard John Roberto live, he will tell you about Weebly websites. He's a lovely, faithful old man. In one of his more recent books, Generations Together, he gave this nice practical outline of what intergenerational whole life of church could look like. Caring, praying, learning, celebrating, and serving together across the generations. Characteristics of the life of the church community done together. Simply having multiple generations in the same place doesn't make it intergenerational. That's like our Skittles bowl. To be truly intergen requires the generations to be genuinely interacting and engaging with each other. It won't just happen. Has anyone seen that great little show, The Newsroom? A few people. It was by the guys who did West Wing, and for a little while we thought it would carry on and go that similar arc, but it only had 2 seasons because Americans didn't like a TV that sort of exposed their naivety. And the opening scene, the guy that will turn into the television host, he's at a sort of a student town hall thing, and they ask him, is America the best country in the world? And he says, no, it's not, but it could be. And I feel like that's almost true here. We've got up on the screen, intergenerational can be inspirational. And I said to Mark, there should be an asterisk, but it's also hard work. And we will make mistakes, and not everyone will like it. But it can be inspirational, and it might just be a full reflection of the image of God. Because it requires intentionality. There's a lot of alities in this. I'm not sure that half of these are even words, but particularly on the part of leaders, yourselves, the people in these sort of rooms, the joy and potential of intergen ministry is to see people of all ages across their generations doing life together, growing in faith together with genuine love, respect, and mutuality. So I want to give you a few ideas. Some of these might resonate with you, others you can just let slide on through. That's the beauty of this. There's no test at the end. But I wonder, what if we approached intergen ministries with the same grace, hospitality and awe with which we approach intercultural ministries or interfaith ministries? I put this out on Twitter and boy did I get in trouble. But let me run you through a few lines and you tell me if we think about how we do intercultural ministries and then if we let that be how we do intergen ministries. We're intercultural, we let the Chinese person take up the offering. Yeah, that's horrible, isn't it? Yeah. We're intercultural. During the sermon, we sent all the white people out to Sunday school. Before the sermon, we spend 3 minutes offering a simple version for the Pacific Islanders. We wouldn't accept that as intercultural ministry. Never ever. Why do we accept it as examples of intergenerational ministry? Suddenly Mark's going, what have I done? Let me be clear, that's not a good model of intercultural ministry. But when we talk about being intercultural, when we talk about developing interfaith relationships, if we approached intergenerational relationships with that same awe, that same humility, that same sense of wanting to value and respect the other, imagine what might be possible. Imagine if we created space and recognised that which we don't know and whom that we don't know and allowed space for that to flourish. Let's move on before we get too upset. Andrew Root, who I believe was out here last year, he's my Yoda. I'm privileged to call him a mate, and one day I will translate his work into an Australian context, but it stands up pretty well. And his book coming out in a couple of months is The End of Youth Ministry, at which point I will have to resign. But Andy's got a podcast at the moment, because everyone's got a podcast, and it's called New Time Religion. And so once you've listened to the entire back catalogue of work experience podcasts, chime into New Time Religion. He's got an actual producer that makes this, so his is much more pleasurable listening experience. But one of the recent episodes that I listened to on the way over, which you shouldn't do when you've already written your content, because then you've got to go back and rewrite some of it, is about how we understand generations and time in our today context and social settings, as opposed to how the early church and even a couple of hundred years ago we understood generations and time. And so I'm going to riff off that just for a little bit. And he says that if you go back a couple of hundred years, the present, how we understood the present, was simply not just multiple generations alive, but actually multiple generations that had passed on as well. It was all of us who were waiting for the return of Jesus. We were the present. It's why the graveyard was directly outside the church, because they had to worship as well. They had to be there for the return of Jesus. The now was a really big thing, a really long thing. So they wouldn't talk about intergenerational as our senior citizens and our children, but how do we pick up from the saints that have gone before us? And how do we talk about those that are coming, that are not yet here? The present time was this really big thing. We were all waiting for the return of Christ, and we were only there because of those who'd gone before us, who passed on the faith. And he says that today, innovation, Silicon Valley, has shrunk the present, not just to those that are currently alive, but to this thing that is new. The present is only a moment, and it is only defined by innovation and that which is new. It disappears. It's constantly being replaced. As an example, hundreds of years ago, the church's homepage might have been ancestry.com. Whereas today, it's almost like the church's homepage, or society's homepage, is a Reddit page of the top viral trends of 2020. We are living in just that moment. We are waiting for the next Apple launch, says the man reading off an iPad 2. This thing, I found an old version of the Dropbox app. Nothing else works on this. But my kids won't let me borrow their iPads. So I'm stuck with this thing. It weighs a ton. I can't take it in hand luggage. It's too heavy. And he then goes on to push on that we don't have to think just about the intergenerational ministries, but the intra-generational ministries, when we all have multiple identities, when we are different people in different settings, when we have multiple personality disorders. We have to think about how we relate to each other within those spheres as well. Ideas that, whilst they would have been present, definitely weren't talked about hundreds of years ago. And he finishes that great little chat about saying that the church used to be directed and set by wisdom. Today, the temptation is to be set and guided by innovation alone, and we need to find our balance within those. We can't reject one or the other, but we need to allow them to inform each other as we seek to be the church today. And the final thought I want to leave you with before we have a quick chat to each other before breakfast is, what are the opportunities that are before us in terms of our public image of the church? If we allowed our conversations, our research, our public statements to be shaped so that they might be relevant and interesting to all generations, I think the society might view us as something other than simply trying to legislate the bedroom, because that's widely what they think we're doing. But if we want to have these conversations intergenerationally, if we want to take positions and assert values and beliefs that are important to all generations, I think we might find a greater imagination. We might find a fuller breadth of passion, of faith, of belief that does speak to our wider society, that all generations within our church can find purpose and meaning and identity in. I can't tell you that would definitely happen, but it'd be worth a crack. Surely it'd be fun to try. Again, they're big theoretical things. After breakfast, if you're in here, am I in here, Mark? Yeah, good. We're going to break down some of the opportunities and some of the cautions and some of the lessons I've learnt about what this looks like on the ground, because again, we've been very much up here, and that's okay. I want you to turn to your tables again. What have you heard? Or what would you like to follow up about? What resonates in your patch? I'm going to give you 5 minutes this time. I only gave you 2 last time. I'm very generous. 5 minutes this time to either write down the question that you want to follow up with, or just, I still can't believe he said that line about the Chinese person taking up the offering. I said it twice now. Yeah, and then we'll come back and we'll sum this up before breakfast.
The thing I heard Brad say is like, 80-year-old and 60-year-old different that might be the first thing. Like, it's not actually about getting kids into things to an obsession. And actually that's what you know how to do the kind of getting something to relate to the 50-somethings who I had someone, well, fine, but someone said to me, we just had a parish dinner and we had online registrations. Amazing. And about 60 people who came, 30 registered online, but someone said to me, an older man said, because I don't registered online, I bet I was the only one. Actually, half of people and paid, which is extraordinary. In the 60s and 70s, in their tickets to the arts festival and their plane tickets, and this is not an unusual thing, but the perception is the whole country is huge. Cost them
yeah, that's why I don't want to. Yes, so we really yes, that's so whenever I work that was the voice of a child, which is hearing the fact. So that was really kind of one of the questions that I consider is where do you start? What about that? Yeah. So if I'll wrap it up. I'll get I'll get you up to do the church can have many different things. What happened was it just turned out that way that as the children finished school, full of I'll wrap it up and then I'll worship. And with the worship, it's like the involve the children. So because we involve the children, their own and parents, then
Yeah.
So I just went past it. Yeah. Kind of involved. It's about involving adult tasks.
Table 3 of the first chapter was like, if a 7-year-old kid won't teach me anything. I was like, that's why I did the little, my daughter reminded me that it's sad. Like it's so table 3.
I had a similar story of yours when we went on the visit for 3 weeks in September. The last time I saw my parents, I cried. I was quite upset. My children come up and give me a hug. It's okay to cry, right? It's okay. It's sad and not seeing the friendship.
I don't think
You're doing great.
but
And the fact that betting is nothing.
there's no yeah, I've got a few laughs. We don't need this stuff now. Yeah, no, I've been playing for so much, but there's some people there that are just determined to I'm like, that's fine. All right, friends, again, I'm going to interrupt.
It's the same thing manifest.
Which is far better than waiting for awkward silence. Apparently, Mark was meant to tell you that in the event of an emergency, run over there. Just keep running. Unless the fire's over there, then run to Mark's place.
Yes.
Yes, good. Yeah, I don't know where Mark's place is either, but he'll put a brew on. Put a pot on, have a brew.
Yeah.
Yep,
Tea's
good.
always good.
He took a flask of hot water to have a cup of tea at a halfway mark of a 3-hour drive. He's getting old. It's just public shaming. It's too late. I've said everything now.
It's about being prepared.
Hey, thank you. Yes, it is. It is.
I thought it was just being Irish.
The 3-hour drive then takes 4 hours. But
I had a cup of tea in the middle
Yeah.
and a wee tray bake, which I don't know if you know what it is. But
we haven't answered anything this morning. I'm well aware of that. We're not going to answer everything in the workshops either. I'm hoping that in what I've said, and perhaps what you've heard around your tables, that we've discovered some questions, or at least some opportunities, or at least maybe a direction that we might want to explore. So we might think, I wonder what happens if we went down this way. There are a wealth of resources available, written by people better than I, to help communities head this way, and I'd be delighted to share them with you. We'll work out a way that my email or something can be up there. Because it is a conversation, it is an exploration, and people are, I think anyone trying to move towards intergenerational ministry is a hero. And so we want to celebrate that and learn together. So it's part of an ongoing conversation. I will fly back east tomorrow, but the wonders of the internet mean that we can keep having conversations. I did want to say that after the workshops, we're going to come back in here and we're going to have questions that you might have arisen this morning or over morning tea. I might just deflect them if they're too hard, but I encourage you, if there is a question that you'd like to ask or something you'd like to reflect back, there will be an opportunity for that. I'm going to give you back to Mark.